Before Thomas Keller became the most respected chef in America, he was a self-taught cook who failed early, got humbled in France, and then built a restaurant empire so influential that half of modern American fine dining still looks like it's living in his shadow. And the crazy part is, Thomas Keller didn't change food by being the loudest, the weirdest, or even the most innovative chef of his era. He changed it by convincing an entire generation of cooks that perfection was the only acceptable standard. Having cooked with several alum of TK's three-star kitchens, I can say from experience that they carried themselves differently. The poise, the confidence, the technical skill, the professionalism, you can usually spot it pretty quick.
Does the legacy hold up? We chef.
Thomas Keller didn't just open great restaurants. He changed what chefs in America thought a great restaurant was supposed to be. Before Keller, America had great chefs, sure. Great restaurants too. But what Keller did was different. He didn't just make elegant food. He built a standard, a system, a culture, and depending on how you look at it, that's either one of the greatest things to ever happen to American fine dining, or one of the reasons why the industry has become so brutal in the first place. This is the legacy of Thomas Keller. Thomas Keller was born in Oceanside, California in 1955, but unlike a lot of chefs who get mythologized later, his story doesn't come with some grand culinary prophecy. His early exposure to restaurants came through family, through work, and through proximity to the business. His mother worked in restaurants, and like a lot of chefs from that era, he got close enough to kitchen life to realize pretty quickly that it either breaks you or it becomes your entire identity. Because Thomas Keller's entire career is built on a very specific belief. Greatness isn't talent first, it's discipline first. Keller didn't become Chef Thomas Keller as we know him today because of culinary school, apprenticeship, or staging. He became Keller because he spent years in working kitchens, absorbing systems, technique, pressure, and repetition, the old-fashioned way, by doing the job over and over again until the standards became instinct. And eventually, like so many American chefs who wanted to be taken seriously in that era, he ended up in France. Because France didn't just teach Keller how to cook better, France taught him how small he was. And it's not like Keller just woke up one day and went to France. Before that, he had already been cooking his way through the Palm Beach Yacht Club, Clark Cookie House, the Dunes Club, Cobbly Knob, La Rive, and eventually Raoul's in Soho, where he worked for Sergei Raoul. He already had reps, but Raoul mattered because it plugged him into a more serious New York restaurant world. And that relationship clearly mattered, because when Keller later opened Raquel, the name was literally a combination of Raoul and Keller. France didn't build him from nothing, it just humbled him. And all of that eventually led Keller back to New York, where for the first time, his career was starting to build real momentum. After the kitchens we just talked about, and after getting humbled in France, Raquel was where he started to get serious attention. But as is too often the case for young chefs, they learn the hard way that being a great cook does not automatically mean you know how to run a restaurant. You work, you get good, you get noticed, you overreach, and then you get humbled. And if you're lucky, you survive long enough to do it right the second time. And Raquel is where Keller learned one of the most important lessons of his career. Great food does not automatically mean great business. Because Raquel didn't fail because the cooking wasn't good. It failed because the restaurant was undercapitalized, the business side wasn't strong enough, and once the market got tougher, Keller and his partner stopped wanting the same thing. Ownership wanted something more casual and sustainable. Keller wanted to keep pushing the food, and eventually the gap became too big to ignore. In 1994, Thomas Keller took over the French Laundry in Yountville, Napa Valley. And that's really where his career stops being promising and starts becoming historic. Because the French Laundry wasn't just a successful restaurant, it became the American fine dining destination. The ones chefs talked about like it was church, the ones young cooks dreamed about working in, the ones diners treated like a pilgrimage, not just a reservation. And what made it so powerful wasn't that Keller was doing the loudest or most experimental food. It was that everything felt insanely considered. Every plate, every garnish, every sauce, every detail of service. All of it felt intentional, and it was. Nothing accidental, nothing sloppy, nothing good enough. The only reason that the French Laundry did not receive 3 Michelin stars right away was it took until 2007 for the guide to even arrive in San Francisco. And that's really what Keller proved there. Not just that America could produce great chefs, but that an American restaurant could operate with the same discipline, polish, and seriousness as anywhere else in the world. And once he proved that, the French Laundry stopped being just a restaurant and it became the benchmark. And once a restaurant becomes the benchmark, every ambitious chef in the country is either chasing it, copying it, or trying to rebel against it. Chefs aren't remembered just for philosophy, they're remembered for dishes. And Thomas Keller has a few that are so tied to his name, they've basically become part of the mythology. The biggest one is probably oysters and pearls, which is such a Keller dish because it's luxurious without being tacky, refined without feeling cold, and built around a few high quality ingredients executed flawlessly. Then there's the salmon cornet, which might be the best example of Keller's style in one bite. It's essentially a tiny cone filled with salmon tartare and creme fraiche, and on paper, it almost sounds playful, maybe even a little gimmicky, but in practice, it's one of those dishes people remember forever because it's so clean, so precise, and so perfectly thought through. And then there's coffee and donuts, which is another Keller move, taking something familiar, almost nostalgic, and then refining it just enough to make it feel elegant without stripping away what made it fun in the first place. And what made the French Laundry even more impressive is that it was never just about a few famous dishes. The restaurant became known for constantly evolving tasting menus, which meant it had to keep creating, keep refining, and keep replacing dishes without ever letting the standard slip. And that's really what made Keller so influential. Not just one iconic plate, but the ability to build a kitchen that could keep producing food and felt thoughtful, polished, and unmistakably the French Laundry. And it's not just what's on the plate, it's who contributes to the creative process. From the CDC down to the chef de parties, they all collaborate as part of the process. After the French Laundry, Keller opened Per Se in New York in 2004, and that was a massive statement. Because it's one thing to build a legendary restaurant in Napa, it's another thing entirely to walk into Manhattan and try to do it again, under even more pressure, more scrutiny, and higher expectation. And the crazy part is, he pulled it off. Per Se became one of the most important restaurants in the country almost immediately, which proved the French Laundry wasn't just lightning in a bottle. Keller's philosophy and standards were so strong that they could be maintained across the country. And then came Bouchon, Bouchon Bakery, and Ad Hoc. And that's where the empire really gets interesting. Because he wasn't just opening expensive tasting menu temples over and over again. Each concept was a different expression of the same philosophy. Bouchon was his version of a classic French bistro. Bouchon Bakery brought the same level of precision to bread and pastry. And Ad Hoc showed he could do comfort food and still make it feel deliberate. And that's really what Keller was building, not just a restaurant group, but a belief system. That details matter, that consistency matters, that hospitality matters, that standards should not drop just because the setting changes. And once you build enough places around that idea, you're not just opening restaurants anymore, you're defining what excellence is supposed to look like. And that's when Keller stopped being just a chef and started becoming an institution. But here's where the Thomas Keller story gets a little more honest. Because no matter how polished the empire looks from the outside, no chef, not even Thomas Keller, gets to scale without cracks forming somewhere. For Keller, that showed up in closures and concepts that didn't fully stick. Bouchon Beverly Hills closed in 2017. Tack Room, his big New York statement inside Hudson Yards, opened with a ton of hype and shut down in 2020. And even beyond the closures, you could see the culture starting to shift. The French Laundry was literally once the best restaurant in the world, and a regular on the World 50 Best list. But over time, places like the Laundry and Per Se stopped sitting at the center of where fine dining was headed. Not because they suddenly weren't great, but because the industry started rewarding something different. More experimentation, more novelty, more edge. Because Keller's brilliance is precision. But precision is expensive. It takes labor, infrastructure, training, and obsessive consistency. And once you try to scale that across multiple cities, multiple concepts, and teams, the whole thing gets harder to hold together. That doesn't make the empire less impressive. If anything, it makes it more revealing. Because the same thing that made Keller great, control, is also the thing that becomes the hardest to protect once the empire gets too big. If you want to make the strongest case possible for why Thomas Keller belongs near the top of any chef legacies conversation, this is probably it. His chef tree is ridiculous. At a certain point, the biggest chefs stop being judged only by what they cook, and they start to get judged by what, or who, rather, they produce. And Keller produced killers. Grant Axe came out of the French Laundry and went on to open Alinea, earning 3 Michelin stars. Corey Lee came out of that same kitchen and opened Benu, also earning 3 Michelin stars. Even Rene Redzepi spent time in Keller's kitchen before going on to build Noma, one of the most important restaurants of the modern era, eventually also earning 3 Michelin stars himself. And then beyond the biggest names, you've got chefs like Timothy Hollingsworth, Lachlan McKinnon Patterson, John Fraser, Jonathan Beno, which is really when the Keller thing starts to look a lot less like a great chef's resume and more like an actual institution. Because his kitchens didn't just produce talented cooks, they produced future leaders, future restaurant owners, future benchmarks. And honestly, that might be the biggest part of his legacy. Because restaurants close, but chef trees, they keep growing. Then there's the Bocuse d'Or, and honestly, this is one of the clearest examples of how far Keller's influence actually reaches. Because over the last 20 years, a surprising number of Team USA competitors either worked in Keller's restaurants or came directly out of his system. Timothy Hollingsworth, Philip Tessier, Matthew Peters, Harrison Tyrone, Brian Lockwood. And Keller didn't just support Bocuse from a distance. For years, Team USA trained out of the French Laundry in Keller's Napa orbit, which tells you everything you need to know about how seriously he took it. This was just another extension of the same mission he'd already been on his whole career, proving that American chefs belonged in the room with anybody. Because a huge part of his mission with the Bocuse d'Or was trying to prove that American fine dining didn't have to live in France's shadow forever. And eventually they got there. Team USA broke through in 2015, medaling for the first time, earning silver. Then in 2017, Team USA took home gold. And that win had Keller's fingerprints all over it, because the chefs who pulled it off came straight out of his kitchen. But let's be honest, you can't talk about Thomas Keller, or really any chef of this level, without eventually asking the obvious question: what kind of culture does perfection create? Because the same obsession with standards that makes a restaurant legendary can also create an environment where pressure gets normalized, intensity becomes routine, and the line between excellence and exploitation can get blurry if kept unchecked. And to be fair, that pressure doesn't always come directly from the chef mandating cooks skip family meal or come in off the clock. A lot of times it comes from the culture itself. The expectations get so high, the mise en place gets so deep, and the standard gets so tight that people start making those decisions on their own because it feels like there's no other way to stay afloat. Nobody has to tell you to skip family meal if the whole team is already doing it. Nobody has to tell you to not take a break if you're already staring at a station that you know you won't be ready for in time. And that's what makes this stuff complicated. Because sometimes the issue isn't just what leadership says, it's what culture silently rewards. And in 2026, that conversation got more concrete when the French Laundry was sued by a former employee alleging labor violations including unpaid off-the-clock work and missed breaks. The Thomas Keller Restaurant Group denied the allegations, and when stories like this come out, whether or not they ever get legally settled, they still force the same uncomfortable question. When a restaurant is built around absolute perfection, who absorbs the pressure required to maintain it? Because somebody always does. So what's Thomas Keller's actual legacy? You could point to him being the only chef in America, ever, to have 2 3 Michelin star restaurants, or the fact that he has 3 disciples to earn 3 Michelin stars of their own. But the biggest legacy is probably that he may be the one chef who most successfully turned American fine dining into an institution. That's why Thomas Keller matters. Just because he made beautiful food, but because he built a blueprint that so many chefs are still following and reacting to, or trying to escape. And if Thomas Keller built the blueprint, then the next chef took the blueprint and completely detonated it. So on the next episode of Chef's Legacies, we're covering Chef Grant Axe.
This is Chef's Legacies. If you enjoyed this video or any of our other videos, please give us a follow and subscribe for more stories behind the world's most influential chefs.